Good afternoon. My name is Reginald Garth, and I am the parliamentarian for the City of St. Louis Charter Commission. I'll be hosting this evening, so I recommend that you don't order the risotto. None other than that, I am pleased to call to order the November regular meeting of the Charter Commission, organized on behalf of the people of the City of St. Louis. The time is now 4:38. We want to thank members of the public who are here, out there, in YouTube land. Welcome you all here to the meeting here at 1520 Market Street. And at this time, we're going to have a call the roll. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Yes, good evening, everyone, or afternoon. What I'm going to do, in line with the first order of business on the agenda, is to call the roll. If you wouldn't mind saying here or present into the mic, so that I can record that you are here. Commissioner Crossman? Here. Thank you. Commissioner Dwight?
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Garth?
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Grant?
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Intagliata? Commissioner Nolan Eccles? Commissioner Riley?
Present.
Commissioner Sheridan? And Commissioner Bobo, which is myself, and I am present. With that, we do have a quorum. I am also going to call our non-voting commission members as well. The Honorable Darlene Green.
Comptroller Green has notified my office that she will be watching on the YouTube tonight.
Great. So that all can hear, she will be watching on the YouTube link. The Honorable Joseph Ballmer. Director Christine Gracia.
Present. Also wanted to let the commissioners know that Commissioner Intagliata let our working group know he would not be available this evening due to travel.
Understood. Thank you. City Councilor Gina Hamilton.
Present.
Thank you. Director Casey Milberg.
Present.
Thank you. Director Sonia Gray. And Mr. Jake Hummel.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. So, draft meeting minutes from our meetings held from September 26th, September 28th, and October 4th are part of the meeting documents saved in Google Drive. And now, pass over to Secretary Bobo again on a motion to approve minutes from the September 26th, 28th, and October 4th meetings.
Yes, so since our last convening of our public monthly meeting, we had a series of special sessions on September 26th and 28th. Those were recorded and made public as well, just kind of to orient us with the city landscape, some population information, and other data as it pertains to our work that we are tasked with. All of that, as was previously mentioned, is available for the commissioners to view. So now I will entertain a motion regarding the approval of the minutes for September 26th, September 28th, and our regular meeting, which was October 4th.
So moved.
Second. Thank you.
It's moved and second. We approve the minutes for September 26th, 28th, and October 4th. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Next item is the chair's report. And the chair's, Commissioner Nolan Eccles circulated her chair's report to the commission via email on Tuesday, October 31st at 9:53 p.m. It is saved in the meeting materials on our Google Drive. You'll find copies of it there. We are up to line item 4, where we talk about the reviews, discussions, recommendations, and suggestions. You were sent instructions on. Thank you. I wasn't loud enough. That's a shocker. Usually I'm the loudest man in the room. So moving on. So our next agenda item is the charter itself. You were sent instructions and agendas for the work group meetings via email, the Charter Commission email on October 24th. If you have any changes to those agendas, you must notify the Charter Commission staff in advance of those meetings. The agenda is meant to give public notice of what will be discussed during the meeting rather than a task list or detailed notes of the topic. Email the Charter Commission email address with any work group agenda updates. That being said, we'll pass the floor to, we're going to our work group reports. Group 1 was the public service and finance. So would anyone like to, from that group, like to speak on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have some printouts on our report out, both for the commissioners as well as the public.
I'll take one as well.
This report out can also be found in the drive in our respective work groups folder. So I'm happy to start off, and then anybody from the work group can add in. So our work group is titled Public Service and Finance. We have a set of articles that are listed at the top. And we first met on October 19th, a few weeks ago, and then decided that we needed one more meeting before we came together as a full commission when we really considered the charge. In those meetings, we reviewed our articles, or at least the first half of them, to look at possible changes and key questions and issue areas that we hope to dive into in the future. We heard testimony from 2 community residents and also discussed the timeline and some further community engagement that we hoped for as a work group. And then really we're starting to brainstorm the relevant stakeholders to engage, particularly government officials that were running the various departments contained within our articles. We are, as Group 1, scheduled to turn in our amendments first out of all of the work groups, which I believe is January 3rd is the deadline. But we had some thoughts about the feasibility of that deadline to really lead into the robust charge as well as the community engagement that we hope to have as part of this process. So later on, we do have some recommendations that we hope the commission will consider that we think could help to strengthen the process and make sure that it lives into some of those community engagement, transparency, robust study of the amendments. And we also really hoped that these commission meetings could have space to kind of discuss the how of our approach as well as the specific recommendations, because we really think that, you know, for public processes like this, a lot of the how for how we're approaching the charter is as important as the changes that we're going to be looking at. And we also talked about how we could message and engage community members, and the commission's work and a couple ideas are in here. So just really quickly, or I can pause it before going to the recommendations. If there's anything from the work group.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Dwight. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. No, thank you. I think that encapsulates at a very high level. To go into a little bit more detail, one thing that became very apparent to our working group was that we do think that it's going to take a little bit more time to make sure that we're thoroughly vetting all the articles that are under our purview. So we wanted to share that with the other working groups in a public forum, just to say that that's been our experience so far, just to make sure that we're giving these the thorough review that we think is necessary, and then also to make sure that we're building in enough time for not just public feedback, but public feedback that's built upon expertise that we're able to build through really diving in, learning from the directors, the department heads when they come to present to this body. We wanted to recommend that, at least for our working group and potentially for others, that the amendments deadline could be put back from January to early March. We think that would allow enough time for our working group certainly to put together a very good work product vetted that's informed by public input, and that still will be plenty of time for this body to do the work that it needs to do to consider those recommendations, whether to move them forward. And then in addition to that, another recommendation that we talked about internally was to allow our work group, other working groups, some flexibility to, create additional meetings, whether to allow for more public input or to meet one-on-one with department heads to get more insight. So that was something that we thought was a little bit important, as well as to give working groups a little bit more flexibility to really meet the needs arising from their experience and their conversations and the cadence that emerges as they're doing their work. And then we did also want to share with the other working groups. We're not sure where everyone else is in terms of getting started with the work, but we would be happy to share, what's worked for us, issues we've run into, our process, information gathering, how we're thinking about moving forward, if that's helpful for your work as well. And then, as Commissioner Dwight mentioned, we certainly want to ensure that our working group has an opportunity to hear from the public. We'd love to provide the public with, once we feel that we've gotten a level of competency and expertise with these, the articles that we're working with, just create an opportunity, if not multiple opportunities, for the public to share their thoughts in the articles and for us to educate on what we've learned about how things are working, what could be changed. And so we've gotten some thoughts about that as well. We know that the broader commission has been, a subdivision of the broader commission has been meaning to talk about engagement and outreach. And so we wanted to bring that to the table for the full commission's consideration as well. So yeah, all that to say that I think that we've been hard at work, have some informed perspective about what we think is needed to do the most effective and transparent job moving forward. And I'm happy to answer questions and talk with any other members of working groups or support any other working groups as may be most helpful.
Just one thing to add is that we hope that at the agenda for next meeting, we could have some of that discussion around community engagement as a commission, and maybe even message it when we put out the notice to invite community members to present on how they think best the commission could engage the community. Because even in our work group, we heard some ideas from community members that attended.
Okay. Thank you for that report. We'll now move on to group number 2 that deals with incorporation, legislation, and taxes.
I'll speak briefly, and then Anthony, we have some things to add as well. One of our members, Scott Intaglia, is unfortunately away today and not able to attend the meeting. We started out and will continue with the intention of actually meeting in our work group twice a month versus once a month. Recognizing that there was more than we could handle in just 1 hour a month. Unfortunately, the first meeting we were still getting organized, and we were not able to hold that meeting because of some recording issues. And so we actually had 1 meeting in October versus the 2 that we had intended to hold. So there's only 1 of record meeting. With regards to that meeting then that we had recently, really we looked at very briefly the people who were at that meeting then were Anthony Riley and Scott Intaglia and myself and Christine Ingracia. And what we did initially was we looked at the framework of those particular articles and how we might be able to segment them so that we could address various clusters over the next few months. And we felt it actually worked out fairly well that incorporation that legislation, which included the Board of Aldermen, and that's something we need to specify there. And taxes were the three areas. Elections are also in there, and so we need to not neglect the fact that elections are in there. As we began to talk about those 4 different clusters and how we would address them, it became clear that two issues became clearer in the middle of the discussions. Number one, that particularly in the case of elections, there are state requirements that are going to impact our ability to be able to modify our own election processes here. And that accordingly, we need to speak as soon as possible in the process to people who are knowledgeable from the Board of Election Commissioners, etc. Christina Ingracia, Director Ingracia, offered to make some introductions and connections so that we would be able to have those discussions initially, and as soon as that's set up, obviously we will, be letting people know, when, where, that kind of stuff. But anyway, so one of the things that having to do with elections that it initially impedes our ability to be able to say yes, these are the issues that we should be looking at. Are number one is this question of the state and how the state and the city elections interact. The second thing that we spent time talking about, and will, I think, perhaps be part of recommendations later on, or when we get to item 5 and we're discussing processes, etc., that it is becoming clearer and clearer, at least to some of us, that the revisions to the charter are massive. There probably isn't a paragraph there that doesn't require some kind of change. And so do we simply revise, amend, or is there another structure that we should be looking at, including the sample muni charter that was included in our initial information that was distributed to all of the commissioners, that we perhaps should be looking at as a format that we should be placing all of these changes into, rather than simply trying to layer on top of what we have already. There's no resolution to that, obviously. It's simply something we're bringing up right now as an issue that does need to be addressed, because it will affect how easy or difficult it is to be able to finally come up with a charter piece, that a charter document at that point that will live for the next decades, as opposed to simply patch some issues that are occurring right now. We will also be looking at meetings with either individual members of the Board of Aldermen or committee heads within the Board of Aldermen. That's something also that we've asked Director Ingracia to look into in terms of what might be the best way, because what we recognize is that that when we look at issues like the alderman, we have to go to the alderman and ask them what works and what doesn't work, so that we have a starting base off of which we work. And so those were basically what we covered. Anthony, do you have anything to add to that? Things to add?
I do not, but Director Ingracia, would you just state the dates for each of those meetings and who'll be coming to visit, and share with us so the public can know the record? And anything else you want to add, I should say.
Sure. Thank you. So our next meeting, I believe, is this on?
Yes.
Okay.
We hear you.
Okay, great. Our next meeting is Thursday, November 9th. There's been invitations sent to the Board of Elections representatives to attend that meeting. And then the following meeting on November 22nd, we've requested elected officials to attend that meeting to advise. The only other thing that I would add that we did have a discussion about is the fact that while we understand there's a sense of urgency about making amendments, suggested amendments, that we may have jumped ahead of ourselves to some extent with respect to allowing the commissioners to learn maybe from an expert or two about the history of the city charter, kind of how we got where we are, and then what best practices might be for a better, more modern city charter.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sure. Thank you, City Councilor Hamilton. We did move our regularly scheduled working group from November 23rd, which is Thanksgiving, to the previous day on the 22nd.
Excellent. Work Group 3, which deals with executive, personnel, legal, and miscellaneous charter provisions.
Yes, so I am the lone person. I'm the representative for that group as other commissioners are traveling. So this group is facilitated and led by our chair, Commissioner Nolan Eccles, and also our vice chair, Commissioner Sheridan, and myself, along with our city comptroller and also city councilor Hamilton, and Director Gray as well. So our group is really tasked with thinking through our charter as it pertains to the lens of executive function, some of the legal information that's also included therein.
Go ahead and
so,
record some notes.
Oh, that's okay. And so what we have found through careful study of our required articles is that there is a lot of, and I'm sure this is kind of commonplace throughout our research and studies, is that a lot of the language is antiquated or doesn't necessarily convey a tone that is inclusive. And so what we have found is that we'd like to go through not only on our articles, but starting with those, to really think through how do we update the language to be more gender inclusive. So where it refers to the mayor, for example, as he or him, being more mindful to include she, her pronouns, they, them pronouns, or thinking through what it would look like just to name the title of the office of mayor, and kind of think through what that looks like as well. So that's a big undertaking that we're thinking through. Also, something that has been proposed in our working group has been around definitions and really making the document itself more accessible. Something that I think about a lot is if I'm a regular person, which I am, and I am reading through this document, there are so many terms that I just do not know unless I go over to Google and look them up. And I consider myself to be relatively well informed. And so the fact that I have no real idea what some of these terms mean, I think is kind of at a detriment to just people understanding and being aware of how the document works, and kind of what's in its purview. So that's something that we are also considering. And then there are miscellaneous provisions as well where, again, because we'd like this to be a more forward-thinking document, hopefully this is something that is revisited several times over, and not every centennial. But we also are thinking through what does it look like to have language that is more evergreen. So removing dollar amounts wherever possible. For example, the mayor's salary is, I believe, capped at between $5,000 and $20,000 a year, which is obviously not the case currently. So really being mindful of how to update the language so that it is more evergreen. City Councilor Hamilton, can you also speak to some other things that you've noticed as well?
Yeah, and we talked about how Article 8, Section 8 says that those salary amounts are minimums and not maximums. But there was also some discussion about having some continuity between the sections so that every section related to every office has the same, 4 or 5 things, whether it's term or finances, whatever that relates to that office, or that subgroup, having the same thing in each section or article of the charter that way. And I don't know that we came to resolution on it, but that is one of the ideas that came out. Otherwise, that was a great recap. Thank you.
So that's our recap. And just as a quick aside, so we also are meeting twice a month. we're trying to keep it at an hour, but sometimes it does spill over and that's okay too. So ours is, every second and fourth, Wednesday, I believe. So, in the afternoon, and those are publicly available on, YouTube.
Excellent. Thank you all for your reports. And of course, all of our work group meetings are made available to the public. So we definitely want to keep you informed of that. As we move to line item 5. Oh, sorry.
There's something that came up for me. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Kind of on your work group brought up Commissioner Crosland, and then what you also shared from your work group is there is kind of a choice point that I think we'll have at some point where do we have a list of changes or do we adopt a new document that maybe has a clear format or, you know, these other changes. And the National Civic League that has that model charter document, they have another really great guide that I'll send to the commission that kind of talks about that choice point for charter commissions and how there's pluses and minuses to each of those. And they have a couple examples of where cities went either way. So just raising that totally resonates with me as a choice point.
Excellent.
And just to be clear, we have the legal right to make that choice? Or is that fine in the ordinance?
We had not considered that, but we can look at that for you.
Okay.
I think you're just talking about rewriting it wholesale.
That's what that's what it talks about. It's sometimes, you know, it's usually an election that comes where the voters have to approve it, and sometimes it's like 200 changes all across it that can be confusing to voters. Is one, you know, downside of that approach, but then the downside of a whole new charter can be that it's, you know, it can seem very different. So.
And we will look at that and some pros and cons for you guys about, you know, whether it's set up or down on the whole, you know what I mean? thing.
That would be great, because I think that what I heard the three groups say is that while there are many similarities in terms of items that we see that will require update and change, that for the sake of the whole document itself, there's gonna have to be some uniformity to the process, and what's finally there. And by the time you start talking about the segmentation that's there and and applying uniformity to it, you may be talking a new document anyway.
All right. So with line item 5, we're going to discuss the consideration of commission governing documents. Here's where we left room for any discussion regarding rules, regulation, policies, procedures, agendas, forms, meetings, hearings, work groups, special meeting requests, and article amendments. Now, we've already have touched on the progress made toward article amendments and as within our respective work groups. And so regarding rules and regulations, during October meeting, we held discussion regarding policies and procedures. Chair Nolan Eccles proposed suggested edits. The documents are titled Chair's Proposed Public Amendment Submission Form and the Chair's Proposed Work Group Process Timeline and Commission Amendment Submission Form. Chairwoman Nolan Eccles circulated revisions by email on Wednesday, October 11th at 1:55 p.m. Those proposed revisions are part of our meeting documents and saved in the Google Drive as one of the documents associated with agenda item number 2. Any other further discussion or suggestions regarding the documents?
Can I ask for clarification? These documents that you're referring to right now, they're not part of what we have in front of us, that those are on the Google Drive, or is that what you're saying?
Yes.
They're also in front of you, yeah.
Well, what is this work group amendment process, for instance, is in front of us. Is that a separate document?
It's in front of you and on the Google Drive.
So it's the policy at the back of the document.
Okay. All right, so this document here then encapsulates what's on Google Drive as well. Okay,
Yes.
great. I see, proposed amendment back here, et cetera. And can I'm just trying to understand, because, clearly there's a lot of paper that's associated with this commission right now. And it is, quite frankly, confusing to me at times to be able to straighten out what's what in the middle of it. To what degree are these documents then, who is developing these documents? How is this coming about so that I know how they've been vetted at this point? I guess that's what I'm trying to understand.
So again, these are the documents that Chair Nolan Eccles brought forward at the last meeting as part of her chair's report that were discussed, and recommendations for changes were made at the last minute, and she circulated her revisions via email on Wednesday, October 11th.
So these are documents that she has been developing. They're not coming from
That's correct.
the
She has been,
commission
that's correct.
process itself. Okay, that was one of the things I wanted to understand about this then is, okay.
And more to that point there, Commissioner Crossan, what we want to do is we want to at least make the process just a lot more inclusive.
Right.
The general consensus of this commission is that we are here to work together as one unit.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, it's just a matter of we want to make sure that we're working as one unit and also making sure that you, the general public here, are also part of that process as well. Be it information, be it with your insight and everything so that everyone is on one accord. We don't want it to seem like it's
Well, and that's why I'm asking for
Yes,
clarification
exactly.
about some of this, so that we understand when we need to actually review and buy into something, because it isn't something that was part of a larger policy, established policy or something, but it's something that has merely been a suggestion at that point by one of the commissioners, and the rest of the commissioners now need to act on it.
correct.
Can I also, to that point, and I also see a hand raised, so I'll kick it over to you after this. But I think to that point, it's probably important for us to also be mindful when a recommendation is coming from, one of our fellow commissioners that is not necessarily time bound. And so I think that that's part of kind of where we are in the agenda anyway. And I am of the opinion that this might be better suited for our next all public meeting or our monthly meeting, just because I think it would provide Commissioner Chair Nolan Eccles with an opportunity to provide some context for what she's created in this document, being that it is a recommendation. I do think that a lot of what's included in this document are based on some of the things that were lifted in previous monthly meetings. For example, when Commissioner Dwight mentioned, are we looking at this through a lens of inclusion? Are we looking at this through a lens of equity and not harming certain populations, or any population rather? So I think to that end, and we've already kind of ad hoc begun in our work groups thinking through our articles in some of these ways anyway. But I do think it's probably best, at least from my opinion, obviously I'm just one person, but just to have her kind of guide us through, okay, maybe what was your thought process around some of these, and then we can, make amendments while she's also present is something that I would like to lift. And then I saw a hand from,
Yes.
yes.
Sorry, I apologize, but just a question as I'm looking at the agenda. When was it and who decided that we should have to have 24-hour notice before the public can seek input at this meeting?
From my understanding, that might have been a directive from the chair herself.
This just seems to me that if we're talking about being open and inclusive, that should include anybody that wants to come up and give public comment during an open meeting, as opposed to signing up, it's a 24 hours notice.
I would support that too.
Yeah,
I'm not, and I apologize, obviously. I wasn't here.
And just for clarity, that came about when we were actually having a Zoom meeting. And so we needed to we were trying to get people to be panelists and things like that. So we've just kind of stuck with that. But the form is now online and everything like that. But that language has just carried over from agenda to agenda. But at the time that was put in place, we were meeting on Zoom, trying to get people panelist links out through STL TV and so on and so forth.
well, and along with another question that I have, for instance, because I have not received information to know how or why. While I have no complaints about my work group and the people I'm working with and the subjects I'm covering, who decided on the work group configurations and what the topics would be per work group? We've received no information. We simply received an announcement of what it would be.
Yeah, that was connected to the last chair's report, you'll recall.
And was that vetted by any of the rest of the commissioners at that point?
It was not.
I mean, quite frankly, having the three officers together on the same committee seems a little bit limiting to me, that they might be more beneficial serving one on each of the work groups, for instance. And I don't believe that we had any opportunity to provide such input.
Go ahead, Director Grassi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to add on the record that I have been concerned about the level of transparency, the ability for the commissioners to deliberate in public and to make a lot of what I think are pretty critical decisions. The ordinance does charge the commission with selecting officers, but also makes note that other decision-making that's necessary should be subject to a vote of all the commissioners. And I know many of you haven't served on a board or a commission before. You all have equal power. You all have the same, you all have one vote. So I'm grateful that the chair is as committed as she is to making sure the process moves forward, but I want you all to also understand that you should feel empowered to be a larger part of the process.
Yeah, I just want to echo from my experience staffing a commission and then also being on a public commission previously that it really is the spirit of it. Like commissioners come together to make those process as well as product decisions. And that the role of the officers is more to facilitate a strong process or to implement decisions that are made by the full commission. And I do think that some of the way that we've approached meetings to be only about discussing charter amendments has really weakened the process in that way because we don't get the chance to talk about how we want to approach it and to do that in a way where it's public. And we can really engage in a robust discussion about it.
How long does it take the commission staff to process speaker request slips?
It's online now. So I was just saying, it's now an online speaker slip. So there's no processing. It's a slip. It's online.
And something that the Ferguson Commission did was they did have a opportunity because, there's time limitations for any meeting. So giving that chance for those people to be prioritized, but they still had a sign-up sheet at the beginning of the meeting for people to fill out and still speak at the meeting. So they did give precedence for people that signed up ahead of time, just for time, but still allowed that.
Well, let me ask a question then. If the desire, and I think I heard it from more than one of the working groups, is that we extend our January deadline into the spring, whether it's February or March or whatever, and we have a bit more time then in terms of the working groups, how frozen are we right now into the process that we have already? Or would we, in the next 30 days, be able to review and perhaps make some revisions depending on what we as a group feel is the best way to move forward.
You kind of jumped the shark on me there, Commissioner Crossley, but I appreciate that. But yes, that was the general idea, was that this would be presented first, so that we have time to look at it, so that you, the general public, have time to kind of see what we're doing. Because I don't want you all being in the dark like a mushroom. But the idea is we want to have time to kind of look over that and then proceed forward with that at the next public meeting. And so that we can kind of hit more of a either February or March deadline, because let's face it, yesterday was Halloween and we are now thawing out Mariah Carey. So, and we all know that Christmas is more important than anything, so we're kind of focused on that, right? This is the part where you can say yes. No, but seriously, in all things considered, we want to make sure that we have enough time to really go over these, because listening to the reports from everyone here, this is not something that we can just look at 1 week and the next week go, okay, well, we're going to do this. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, and we cannot afford to look as if we're not really taking this and really digesting this and really getting to the meat of the matter of it all, so that we're presenting something very robust and something that's going to live on for the next 10 years, and so on and so on. So yes, we definitely want to take enough time to review these suggestions, and that's another thing too. Recommendations, suggestions, they're synonymous. What they also have something in common called, they're not necessarily gospel. You know, we don't have to necessarily take every single recommendation to heart. We can discuss that. We can make our own recommendations as well until it actually becomes a thing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So just
Well,
to
I would
circle
think
back
as long-
to Mr. Hummel's original question, do we have to vote in our next meeting to amend our public comment process? How we facilitate that change to Mr. Dwight's point about adding in-person requests if we receive them last minute, but prioritize those who submit a speaker to slip.
We can certainly do it that way. I mean, if that would be more comfortable for the commission here to decide that way.
Well, I think my question is, did we vote the first time on it? Because if we didn't, then we may not need a vote to reverse something that we didn't vote on.
Procedure change.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
this is a procedure change.
So the only thing that you all have in your governing rules is section 5 regarding the limitation on comments to 3 minutes, unless that is waived by the individual who's presiding over the meeting. And there are a couple of other things there, but you could otherwise accept them how you would like to accept them.
Those are something we implement next.
Yes, let's implement that next meeting.
Would it be okay for us to do a vote on it, just to show like that is
Solidarity or.
our,
Oh, yeah,
as a commission, our decision?
Would you make the motion?
So I'd love to make.
Let's entertain a motion, sir.
Absolutely. So I'd like to make a motion for a future commission meetings that we will have a community testimony process where there's online opportunity to sign up, as well as in-person opportunities to sign up to speak at a meeting.
Second.
It is moved and second that we allow for the change in process for the community to be involved or to have comment. The community comment process. I can talk. Okay. So, that'll be amended. Madam Secretary, would you like to call the roll?
Yes, so I believe if we,
Is there a general? Right. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I,
The ayes have it.
You need to call the negatives.
Oh, yes. All opposed? Okay. No negative.
hearing none, the motion
no, just a quick comment. Just wanted to thank everybody for the conversation. I think that, this is obviously the city's first go at doing this. We're all figuring this out together. There's been a lot of hard work that's gone into this, and I think that we're all committed to making this as robust and transparent a process as possible. I think I've heard that from everybody on this commission, present or not present. So just want to say thank you to everyone for this commitment and your conversation on this tonight, and commitment to ensuring that's the case moving forward. I think it's very important that, anything to deal with, the deliberate decision-making of this body or anything done in this commission's name or anything regarding budget or policy or processes that we do have that commitment to the public to make sure, not just that it's done, in a full public setting, but also to make sure that everyone's voices, on this commission are reflected in that, because we all bring wonderfully different skill sets and perspectives to this table. And I have so far greatly enjoyed hearing from everybody and everyone's perspectives so far and everything that we've done. So just wanted to reiterate that and thank everyone for that. And then one other piece, since we are on this sort of catch-all agenda item regarding agendas and meetings and whatnot. So I know we've had conversation. It was our office's understanding that this was the committee meeting at which we were to report on at what meeting department officials and whatnot would be able to come and start sharing their expertise and speaking to charter articles. So I believe that the December 6th meeting, which is our next regularly scheduled full meeting, that we believe that will begin that process there. So just wanted to follow up on that. So I think that's it for now.
So that's a good point. So in our working group meeting, we requested departments to come to our working group meeting so that we have more focused time, looking at groups articles based upon department in the life of the city. Be more focused and not to hear 15 testimonies in this one gathering. So that's what we decided in our working group, maybe slightly different than what you're asking. I think that'd be more helpful for us to work through our articles and to hear your feedback than to have just a slew of all the kind of reports going to executive committee for our working group at least.
Sure.
Yes.
So then just make sure I'm understanding correctly, would the request be to maybe hold on doing that public portion or the full portion until working groups have had a chance to really, I see. Got it. Okay. Sure, yeah.
It would seem to me that we might be talking a two-step process here. And that because the working groups are the initial kind of thought development process, that having the people who are pertinent to the particular articles in the work groups meet with those groups initially might make sense within a larger group process afterward to kind of synopsize big issues or whatever as we get to the point where we're trying to be able to share among groups then as opposed to just within a particular group. Does that make sense? Does that?
Yeah, I like that idea because once we have those set of big issues, it can be really helpful to the public to theme these larger meetings so that people can really know, okay, this is the meeting to come to learn about how, I don't need to make up an issue, but how this issue crosses them. And that can really help with then getting meaningful testimony from community members. So I think it'd be really great if we could end this year knowing what some of those might be for next year. Because I'd love to see us message some of this more broadly publicly, whether through a press release or whatever, about the Charter Commission has had their first set of meetings. This is how we're thinking about our process. This is where you can get engaged. These are the deadlines we've set for ourselves.
So then the thinking would be maybe that first week of December then, instead of that full, targeting that towards the smaller, starting in December, the smaller, working groups engagement, and then with a future eye towards, anything that may spark more public interest or input that we can think of targeting. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because not every issue is going to be one that sparks the public's attention. And what we should be doing within our committees is identifying the key issues at that point, but covering all of them within our work groups themselves so that the recordings themselves include that information for people.
Perfect.
I like what your group did, Commissioner Dwight, and had testimony in your working group. We did have one person in as an attendee for our working group session, and I couldn't figure out how to make them panelists to be able to hear from them as your group did. So I think we're having a session for the Board of Aldermen, to your point, session for the Board of Elections, et cetera. Public can come to that meeting and then put that particular area, and then we can bring that our feedback to the larger commission body.
It may be that we have to ask them to be a panelist in advance to be able to speak with them. I think that may be part of the challenge.
I think that might be one of the reasons why originally it was to, City Councilor Hamilton's point, why there was a process of 24 hours, just so that they could send out the link to become a panelist. I think that that's probably part of the rationale.
Did you have something to include, Director Rossi?
No, not on this topic, but there was one thing I wanted to bring up before we were in recess.
Okay.
Can I just confirm and summarize what we were just talking
Sure,
about?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That was a lot. So,
So at our next meeting, there's a set of kind of how are we setting up our process
Mhm.
considerations, changes to the timeline so that it's a little bit more transparent, how the work groups want to function, considerations of some of this chair's report, so that in December we can really make some decisions to have that really set up for the future. Also, work groups can start reaching out to their various department heads for their work groups, which are publicly recorded, to, get into it and figure out what they want their future process to be. And in December or January, we'll all report back on where we think the shared issues are that might be good to bring officials to these big meetings. Is that, Dave, you right?
And I was just gonna say, Casey her office has been in contact with most of the department heads. Obviously, Christine has a direct line to all the older people. And my office can also help your working group get into contact with anyone other than that, right? So.
Great.
And I would just add that we do want the public's input on these various areas. So please come to working group meetings and share your testimony in those sessions regarding these topics, these clusters of articles.
Let me circle around to one other issue that I raised earlier, which I don't know whether we resolved, and if we have, I'm not sure how, which is going back to the working groups. Are we okay with the working groups the way they are presently configured or not? Number one. And number two, regardless of whether we're okay with the working groups the way they're presently configured, or not, or they're configured, we need, for transparency purposes, to understand, to get information back from the chair with regards to how the work groups were developed, so that we and the community know what the rationale was.
So I am, first, I'm not married to any particular working group. I think that they were originally kind of pulled into a certain way just because that's the way that some of the actual articles themselves are kind of categorized, for lack of better words. However, to your point, I think it is worth us maybe re-examining or taking some time to consider other potential ways that articles could be clustered together. And again, I'm committed to serving wherever possible to create efficiencies. So if that means that we rethink what our working groups look like, how many people are in a working group, if that's something we need to bring up in our next general body meeting, I'm on board with that. And I'm not sure that actually resolves the point that you're making, but I am here to say if that would facilitate a process by which, to your point, to your earlier point, there was a member of the executive committee on each, and we rethink what those articles are really pulling at or who they would impact, for example, or starting with the end in mind. I think that would really create a good opportunity for us to rethink what those are. And this kind of goes along the theme of we all have an equal voice on this commission. So while I want to be clear that I do appreciate the thought and the planning from a strategic lens that goes into trying to consolidate and make a very big task more manageable. However, we can also be iterative in our approach if we find that there's a better way to do it.
And I just, can I jump in? for one more point. I did just want to reiterate that the chair report at the last meeting and at this one does kind of go into some of the details about how the sausage was made. And that was also discussed in the public meeting. I just want to say that just because she's not here, and I'm not exactly sure how all of it came about, but for example, the division of the articles is something that my office suggested, right? Just grouping them together on what makes sense. And there were some other things that explain that her process kind of in her report and in the last meeting as well. But we'll make sure that it gets onto the agenda for the next meeting as well.
Yeah, I actually think that the clustering of the articles make a lot of sense. And so that's not my issue. I think that my question, and it's not even, I like Anthony a lot, I like Scott a lot, but I don't necessarily know why I got put with them on that committee. And I'd like to understand why we were placed. You know, it isn't expertise. I have no expertise in taxation and elections. You know, maybe none of us do it, so it doesn't matter at that point. But what was the rationale? Because there had to be something that was the spark that caused the configuration that was there. And I think we all want to know what it is at that point.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I know we were talking about, I'm sorry, direct, no? Okay.
I'm so confused about what direction we're going here. And I just wanna, are we scrapping the timeline that was presented to us? Is that what we're doing? Because we have this very intricate timeline that's in front of us, which I think is too aggressive, right? But is that what we're doing? One thing. Two, are we scrapping the work groups at least until our next meeting? Or are we gonna continue the work groups? Three, I'm still not clear how we actually get information from people in the city to us. Our work group identified at least 8 people that we wanted to talk to, including department heads and the college. How do we get them in front of us?
Commissioner Grant, can you speak into the mic?
Could you speak into that?
Can you speak into the
We have to have a meeting that's open to the public. We're talking about taking information that we will use. I mean, our meetings are open to the public, but we have not had a
Public hearing.
meeting where we are inviting essentially anyone to come up and give us comment about, here's what I think a problem is. It may or may not be relevant or fixable, but I think that is very important to our process. And we haven't done that yet. So I'm just trying to figure out when these things are gonna happen, or if they're gonna happen, or what the process is going forward.
So first, no one's not really. The timeline itself is not being scrapped, and neither is there or the work groups themselves are being scrapped. All that was being discussed here was that if these were the proposed things that the chair presented and everything, that Commissioner Crossland was trying to understand how was everything made, how was it formulated, and what was the reason, the rhyme, and all of that behind that. That's one. Yes, two, and of course we've all agreed that the timeline is quite aggressive. But I believe that what we're trying to do is we're just trying to not so much more or less like say scrap the whole timeline, but more along the lines of just kind of like let's look at this timeline again. Let's kind of move the needle, like kind of push back a little bit. So nothing has not been officially been scrapped, as it were. So there's that.
Okay.
So what we're doing is we're taking the time to review these processes and everything in which the chair left to look at, and then we're going to basically have an opportunity to put our voice to it, if that makes sense.
Okay, and I am not necessarily opposed to the work groups or the
Mhm.
clustering. I think it's actually could be an efficient way to deal with the problem. I just logistically, like, I don't know what's gonna happen on December 6th.
I've been taking notes
Yeah.
to try and really get to the action items and what we've decided. So could I try and read it and
Okay.
see if it matches? So I have this in 3 areas. There's process changes, there's work group configuration and activities, and then there's next meeting agenda. In the first space process, we talked about there's some priorities that all the work group have named that need to be incorporated into the current timeline because it's not feasible as it is now. So there's some kind of process between now and the next meeting to create an updated draft that incorporates those priorities that we can then discuss and then decide on at the next meeting. Work group configuration, there's been a request for information to the full commission on how members were assigned to work groups. And that'll happen at the next meeting when the chair is back. But for now, we can continue as is until we get that information.
Okay.
Then the last space, agenda items for next meeting, considering those proposals for a new timeline. We've talked about community engagement as something that we really want to talk as a full commission on and maybe hear from people. And then the reports from the mayor's office and the department heads will be received by then. And there maybe is some discussion that we might want to have.
Yeah, so my understanding of the commission's deliberations and what working groups would find helpful on the departmental feedback portion was start with the working groups, with coordinating department heads in front of working groups. We had thought about early, the first week of December was what we had discussed. In terms of the logistics of who coordinates that, that will be something that our office will work with city councilor's office on, who will contact with all the different working groups to start coordinating those dates on that. So starting the first week of December.
Correct. And if you have people who you want to come to your meeting and you know you want them to come to your meeting, then you can just let us know. Again, as I mentioned previously, Casey's office is working with all of the department heads. Christine Ingracia has a direct line to all of the alder people, and my office can help you get into contact with anyone else that you would like to talk to in city
So-
government.
So, and our work group talked about the various department heads that we would like to hear from. And Ms. Milberg, I assume will take care of that. What about the comptroller? That is.
So I'm gonna-
how
one
do we
more
get someone
time.
from the comptroller's office to provide us information?
Yes, sure. So one more time, Casey is dealing with the department heads. Christine Ingracia has a direct line to the Board of Aldermen, and I can get you into contact with anybody else that you want to speak to. Anybody in city government, any person, any office.
So is that something that we are then not pursuing in our work groups right now, but waiting until the December 6th meeting?
No. You
My
can let
sense
us
is we
know
can-
who you want.
Work groups can right now field those requests, and it sounds like we all have our schedules, and we can be like, can they come to any of these meetings that are then all publicly listed?
So as an example, our work group has already started. We've invited Board of Aldermen for one meeting, Board of Elections for another meeting, to our working group session that's already been invited through Director Ingracia.
Because I would think that even if there is some changes within the working groups themselves, there are still going to be 1 or 2 people in that working group that are part of the current working groups. It's not like they're going to be totally, there's a total upheaval. As I said, my major issue is simply the 3 officers being on one committee together. But if you divide those up among the groups, then obviously one person has got to kind of switch out or whatever it is. So this is I don't see this as a massive upheaval. I see this as a communications improvement over what currently exists, but I don't see it as being so massive that we can't continue with the work that we have scheduled already.
I appreciate the ask for clarity, though.
Yeah.
That was.
No, no.
There's been a lot
Yeah,
discussed.
it's been a lot. That being said,
But let me lean in. So your last question around public comment, public hearing. Are we concerned that there are people who have not filled out speaker slips who have something valuable to add to our work? Are we concerned that their voices are not being heard or the opportunity to be heard?
My concern would be, and this seems to be something we're going to address on December 6th, is there are people who might not even know that we're meeting, let alone the speaker slip issue, and that we should be out searching
Okay,
and soliciting
okay.
for comment. That's not, necessarily restricted to like, we are going to talk about the board of E&A, or we're gonna talk about article on the art museum. But just like, we want to know what the problems are.
So,
Go ahead. Do it.
yeah,
That's
okay,
what
and then
Yes,
I'll
thank you.
pass it to you. Okay, so to that point, we discussed at previous meetings, and some of this was covered in Commissioner the chair's report as well. But I think it is a point of clarification that needs to happen just around, we are planning on having public hearings, and I think we also were mindful to say we need to be thinking about how to collect a wide variety and a wide range of public comments, but that we would also put a lot of thought into what those public hearings could look like. Obviously, people can come and speak in these spaces, but I think to your point, if they don't know that we're meeting or what might be the theme of that meeting, they may not know what to share, even if they have something very pressing or pertinent or some ideas about how we can kind of improve upon the process. So that's one thing. And then again, the second part is we're thinking through how to have dedicated time and space, whether that's out in the community at a public library, for example, or at a coffee shop. I'm just kind of throwing out locations, but at a place where it is that is the only agenda item is to gather feedback. So
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think speaking in my I voice, it's felt more like that was just written somewhere, but there wasn't any chance for us to talk about it. So there is like in that timeline, like it says public hearing on some date, but as a person that like does community engagement facilitation from past commissions, it's not just you put something on a date, you like have a strategy behind how you engage community, what's the reason, how do you communicate it, and that leads to what it looks like. And I feel like it happened the other way. And so I, as a commissioner, felt really confused when I got messages about what I was supposed to be doing around it, because we had never really had a conversation about it. And then to your point, Commissioner Grant, like I 100% agree. Like my metaphor is like we haven't done any public welcome mat like for the process around community engagement. Like we haven't messaged that or gotten clear, I think, on the why, which is really important for the public to be able to engage.
So basically what I'm hearing here is that before we even discuss like when and where and how to do when and where to do the public hearings and all of that, I would like to parking lot that or kind of table that until when we get that process in place and that we all can agree on that. So that way we understand the logistics. Kind of like basically what we're talking about at the December 6th meeting.
That we'll have dedicated space to talk about it.
That way we have the dedicated space to actually do that.
Yeah, I would request that we have a specific agenda item at the December 6th meeting, so that we have time set aside to discuss a process and a timeline, at least in the broadest sense, that goes around those community engagement, actual meetings, but is the process that goes along with it.
And a plus of that is if we can like message that publicly, whether that's on one of the social media platforms, or if some of our friendly officials, maybe the president or others, would be like, this is the meeting where there's an agenda item to talk about getting engaged. How do you want to do that?
Yeah, so we have talked a little bit about that, and as we prepare for next meeting where we'll have a agenda item for engagement and outreach, for this meeting there was a memo about it. There was a request for public places where we might have a meeting, so there's a memo in your materials about where we might do it, and we can only request a date that's like 90 days out for example, for public libraries. And so That's one of the things of the December meeting. We will want to come with our calendars and make sure that we're able to identify a date so we can get it reserved at the libraries.
I would also just throw out that maybe the History Museum would be a possibility. It's nice and centrally located.
Director Ingrassi?
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I'm not sure if it's something that's of interest to the commissioners, but our working group did bring up the possibility of inviting experts to come testify on the history of the city charter and also best practices. So if that's of interest as a possible possibility for an agenda item next time. And I don't want to forget, I did tell you all I would update you. The Kennedy room, hearing room at the Board of Aldermen is now available if you're interested in moving over. The only caveat I will let you know is, unfortunately, we have a standing committee meeting that happens at 3:30 on Wednesdays. And so if you're interested in using it for your standing meetings, you'll have to consider changing the, possibly the date, but definitely the time that you meet.
We'll let that be made known to the chair and vice chair so that they can at least have time to deliberate on that as well. I would love to use the Kennedy room. But of course, we'll wait until they are actually here to actually make their recommendations as well.
Yeah, that's a process.
And if it would be helpful, as just regarding location, we can have the Charter Commission staff reach out to each commissioner individually before we publish the next agenda.
Excellent.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Okay. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, because
Just
I'm
because,
so sorry. I'm so sorry.
go ahead.
just because yeah, could someone remind me at this point of what items we have placed on the agenda for next time? Because I think we've gone through several.
Yes.
Should I read it? Timeline changes, community engagement, launch, reports from mayor's office and how that process is going, officials that we're all targeting and issues that are rising so that we can incorporate that into the timeline, and then possibly an expert on charter history
And then the
If they're
working group.
and working groups as well.
Working group development and then reports, progress reports.
Yes.
Yeah. I think, my item, really
Go
quick.
ahead.
In the meeting minutes that we just approved, I checked in and we did do the amendment to change. We did have a motion to change the proposed amendment form to add those equity questions, but I don't think they made it into the updated version of it. So if we could just make sure it makes it into
Okay.
the updated version.
Madam Secretary, do we have another item?
Yeah, yes.
So we have that before. Any further discussion? Okay.
The only other question or thing that that I believe the attorney's office was going to check on has to do with the question of revision, what we're able to do in terms of amendment versus redevelopment, if we want to call it that, the launch of a new charter, and so there was going to be some legal response to that.
Yeah, I thought was that one of the line items you had on?
And I'll send the guide out, but yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Any other items of note?
On that sort of broader issue of smaller amendments versus a larger structural change, I would like to be sure, because I think this is the case, but that legally the commission can combine amendments in the manner that it thinks is best to put to a vote of the people, without concerns for single subject issues. So for instance, if we have to amend, if we have a structural change that would result in an amendment of multiple articles of the charter that might be disparate or cover executive versus legislative functions, can we do that? And bundle them in a way that we think is best.
I think so, and something that the Ferguson Commission, their process did, because even though they weren't literally changing a policy document, they had policies that interacted across work groups, and so they both had that built into the process through it, and then they also saved a month at the end to have that kind of process to say, where do these interact, where do they overlap, how do we prioritize?
Would what it require, I don't know this, an annotated version of the current charter where we would literally, paragraph by paragraph, indicate where it's gone, what's happened to it, etc. So there's a document that would come out of our working groups that would provide the guts at that point, so that anybody could track back, when it disappeared at that point, out of the final charter, the new revised charter, but could go to that annotated version then to find out precisely what had happened to it.
Director Rossi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to add that to Commissioner Grant's point, it may be helpful to phrase a question to the City Councilor's office. The ordinance provides, according to the Missouri State Constitution, that the City of St. Louis is empowered to both amend and revise its charter. I think it would be interesting to know the legal definition of that and if there's been any case law.
Thank you.
I just, one of the things we're gonna have to think about is, as we consider amendments that might be interlocking, is that we need to make sure not only do we have the ability to bundle them, but that we don't present two bundles that conflict with each other.
That may
I know there's a process for how that gets resolved in the law, but I would prefer not. That would be, I'd prefer that we're going to have to think about that
That's a
very
good point. Yeah.
carefully.
and that may be more of a legal.
Yeah, but we ultimately will be making the
Yes.
decision about
Yes.
which.
That's a good call.
Yeah.
Any other further discussion?
No, so,
Okay. I see your hand. I know that, we did not have any, public, for this time around, even though we voted on the change of that, so are we doing?
I think it would be nice to offer if we have
Not
time
quite 6 o'clock yet.
It's not quite 6 o'clock.
for a couple minutes.
Chair recognizes. Thank you.
We need to get you a
Oh,
mic.
yeah.
Need to get your mic.
Thank you very much. 3 very quick things. Number one, and this may save you some work and it may not, you might remember that in Prop R, it required that all of the non-inclusive language in the charter be changed. So the citizens voted on that, almost 70% of them. So you have that mandate. So go ahead with it. You don't need to just discuss it, just do it. The second thing is, I'm a person whose life and work has been on how can change really happen. So I've been sitting here month after month, and I keep seeing public comment be pushed back and back and back. And let me tell you something. I think if you look at significant change and you also look at significant public hearings and tried to figure out, did anything really change? Here's one factor which we're working against, and that is that if you all aren't going to make or really consider big structural changes, the people don't want to take their time and effort to put the work in, like us. Okay? And here we are. The second thing is that all of the evidence says that you need public comment and people in the community with expertise and experience. And I don't mean just academics, who you have not called on, either to understand how you can really get people's voices who want structural change into your process. Here's what the evidence is. The earlier you do it, the bigger the chance is that you're going to really have real change. You're not doing it early. And the reason that you never see real changes most of the time, and I look at some cities that have been successful, you never do it if you say, okay, now that we've heard from the status quo and those who are in power and have a vested interest in not changing anything, oh, at the tail end, let's have a public meeting. Okay? There are lots of people in this town who have serious thoughts about that. They haven't been invited. If you wait till, oh, now that we're done and we've heard from everybody who's in charge, and now let's have the community have their say. I'm not saying those were your intentions. I don't think that they were. But as somebody who watches this and does it all the time, okay, for my whole career, it doesn't happen. The public thinks, oh, well, now they've cooked it. Now they're going to ask us what we think. And you know that the more people that you hear who are in charge, the more molded in your heads with all your good intentions is to have things stay the same with a few tweaks. That's what happens, okay? And so I myself, I can't speak for my colleagues, but you know, we're willing to help and to say, okay, let's talk about some serious big changes. Let's talk about the fact that the Board of Alderpersons really doesn't have any budget power. Not really. That's really unusual, by the way. Let's talk about whether or not we need a city manager so that the place works, for God's sake. Okay? Let's talk about some of these things. And where in the process can that information and those discussions take place so that they have a chance to be seriously considered? Not at the tail end. Not even, you know, in February, when if you move your product timeline forward, you have them. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And so I simply wanted to say that. In terms of do you do some changes at a time, I would say look at St. Louis County. God knows they had a very particular, weird way of changing their charter. And the guy who was in charge of it is now a resident of the federal system, okay, who is primarily in charge of it. But, you know, when they were pissed at Sam Page, then they considered the executive. But regardless of the political thing, people came out. They were interested in how much power the county executive had, and they talked about it. And they voted, okay? And it was a big topic. So maybe that would work for the elections. But I guess the thing that I want to emphasize the most is the second point that I made. It happens, and people with good intentions, it happens. And the more you hear, the more the final product gets set in your heads. I mean, in 3.5 months, I have heard nothing. And I've been to every single one of these things. I have heard nothing, no discussion of how to vet major structural changes, okay? You're reading, but you know, that should be at the first of it. At the first of it, probably should have already happened. But you don't have a chance. You don't have a chance if you put it late. So, excuse my passion, but you know, I want things to change. And the city has a shot with you. Don't blow it, okay? Now, I'm not speaking for my colleagues here, I'm speaking for myself. But I think we sort of, yeah, we agree. But, you know, there we have it.
Before
Can I-
hold on. Before we move, first of all, thank you for what you just shared with us. Myself, Commissioner Carlson, are on the working group looking at the Board of Alder people and kind of the process there. And so your comment tonight puts that on our mind for our agenda. So you raised that for us tonight. And Thank you for that.
Yeah, and
But
don't just
secondly-
don't hear from people in charge.
But secondly, you said earlier on, they have not been invited. When you say they, who are you speaking of specifically so they can be
People out in
invited?
the community that I did hear tonight that there is some list of some people who should be contacted. We have a lot of city planners, some in the trenches, some professional city planners. We have a lot of people in this community who have serious thoughts about these things. We have people who have lived other places. We have people who have serious thoughts. I cannot have a conversation with the public without hearing something about, well, this doesn't work and I think I know why. Okay?
I would like to hear from these people. Could you send us a
I-
list of their names and contact
Well,
information? So-
You all should be doing that as well. All of you should
Yeah.
be doing that.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
we
do-
certainly
I mean-
have some ideas, but that's not our job. But I'd be happy to give you a list.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I
Yeah, sure.
I feel like in this whole process, I need to learn a lot, and we're trying to collect that information. That's why
I know.
would like to get more from the public. But if people have, I would say to anyone, if they have a suggestion of like, here's someone you should talk to, or here's an idea.
But you need to say, are you really going to consider structural change or not? Are you really going to consider, for example, giving the Board of Alderpersons budgetary power? That would be huge and big change, okay?
Sure.
And the comptroller hasn't been here yet. Are you really going to think about making a city this size work better by having a city manager? Are you really going to think about that? And if you are, to put those big structural changes, the dot and tittle and taking out the antiquated language and all that stuff, and even having an election in November rather than March and April, okay? That's not very tough.
Because you just said it, it will be considered, is what I'm saying. So thank you again for
Okay.
sharing with
That's all.
me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that part of the challenge has been the process thus far, because we've been assigned articles and are looking at amendments. It's difficult for us to break out of that mold and get into well, what do we do then about these big changes, because it doesn't fit within the agenda we've had so far. And so that's something that also I'd like to see us add to the agenda in December, because there is this incongruity between the scrutiny of the articles and the lack of attention then to the bigger issues. Anyway, I know there was another question over there.
Chair, Chair recognizes.
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just that, not disagreeing with anything you said, I agree with those things. More about, I think today's meeting and the things that we're saying that we're trying to prioritize on the next agenda are us trying to write it. I think you're hearing, all of our discussion today has been, we don't feel like
Yes.
the last few months have set us on the path that we want to be on, and we're trying to change that process.
Recalibrate.
Please state your name for the record, please.
Yeah, I'm Liz Kramer. I'm a resident of the 7th Ward, and I'm the co-chair of the Community Mobility Committee, which advises the city on non-automobile transportation issues. And I want to echo everything that Kathleen just shared. In our enthusiasm, one of my colleagues, Don Walter, who's not able to be here today, spent the whole summer researching the charter, best practices as how the charter relates to mobility and transportation, and we have some big ideas. We also have some very small ideas that I think are pretty easy to say, like, okay, great, make those changes. But, we want to see a Department of Transportation. We want to see a radical restructuring of the way that executive offices work, because that affects the way that things operate on the ground. I don't need to give specific examples today, because I think I want to make the point of what Kathleen said, that folks in the community have been thinking about this. We have things we want to contribute. And that the way that the charter operates is affecting our ability to be good advocates and to be residents who can participate in an active way. So I'm really grateful to all of you for reconsidering the way that you're thinking about things. I know that we will share our materials. Dawn has written an extensive report. She's happy to come to the Work Group 1 meetings and talk about that. I'm happy to talk more about it. It's really difficult right now as a resident, and I spend a lot of time looking at public meetings to figure out how to contribute in the work that you all are doing. So the more that you can do to sort of show us the way, the easier it will be to get the kind of input that folks have really been thinking about since the minute that this passed out of the Board of Aldermen. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
You said you have a report you want to share with us? Is that,
Yes.
okay. Do you know when you'll have that for us?
Well, I have it right now, but I
Okay.
can also email it to the email address.
Please
so you
do.
all can have
Thank you. I'll
access.
take both.
I just would encourage, like, obviously people, have a lot of ideas about what would be an improvement, but we need to know them, right? And so whatever you can give us is helpful. You know, if there, we have a model charter here, but no one else has presented to us, like, here's a specific change. Here's the language. Anything like that would be extremely helpful.
And to the, to that point, like, we're the ones with power, and so in that way, we even implicitly set what's possible in the space, even if we're not explicitly being like, we don't wanna hear, by not prioritizing that and then like proactively communicating, I think that's like a best practice around it. And so I agree, like, I really hope that at our next meeting and maybe in between, you know, we can like try and put some proposals together for that new timeline that will really prioritize and communicate like widely the message that we want to hear from all these groups on what we should be considering.
I agree. I think also my background is in marketing and communications, and I think again what's been echoed and what we've heard not only from the public but also from fellow commissioners is that we need to make a platform for people to be able to share, then leverage communications tools to get that message out that we want to hear from people. Ask for those who have already been thinking, as was mentioned, have already been thinking broadly, but also kind of very tactfully and very specific ways how we can implement changes, what those look like. So it's a multi-step approach, but I think that, well, I can speak for myself. I believe we're all on board to expedite that and really make sure that that's equitable, that it's listed, that it's communicated well and clearly, and that there's an easy way for people to provide that feedback, whether that's an online form for people to say, hey, I want to speak at the next meeting. Here's my expertise. This is what I'm interested in sharing. Whether that's sending us an email to, you know, the Charter Commission Gmail account. So we are committed to enhancing that, and having heard that multiple times. So that's very fair.
Councilor Hamilton.
Okay, and just to kind of move some action on these points that we've heard and have been raised, we do have a proposed amendment form in the meeting packet. And if Parliamentarian Garth wanted to entertain a motion to approve that form, then we could get it up on the website this week. And just, that's one thing. The other thing is we've accepted these speaker forms for every public meeting or every regular meeting that we've had except for the very first meeting. We've also decided to, or the chair has asked that we would publicize these meetings on social media. We have them on the websites. We post in the regular places where we post. And we've also decided to, or I should say the chair has asked us to put this meeting announcement in the community email that goes to several community organizations who have signed up. If there's, in the interim, until we get the form up, obviously our email address is chartercommission@stlewis-mo.gov, and information can be submitted that way. And each member of the commission has an email address that is a St. Louis City email address, and those email addresses are on our website. When you go to the board's information and you click on learn more about the board, you have email addresses for each of the commissioners in that form as well.
would it be okay if some of us have either some previous lists, like I have lists of neighborhood
Absolutely.
associations, to maybe contribute those to getting added to the.
Absolutely.
Councilor Hamilton, you said that this is the proposed, what was that again?
Amendment form.
Yeah, it's this.
Okay. Alright.
So this is for community members.
Well, let me clarify, because if we were to approve this form and then we discovered there was something that needed to be changed or added, we could simply change it, right?
Yes.
So it behooves us to go ahead and approve it so that we can post it.
Smart lady.
Thank you.
So I would like to make a motion, but I also think we need to include the equity questions. Is that
That's what you were
my
asking.
understanding?
Is this is the,
No,
it's something else.
that framework is for us to use and evaluate the articles. This is for
Right,
anyone
Right,
that
it's on the
submit.
last,
an
Where's
article
the,
they have.
Yeah,
last
I wouldn't,
But this
it's the last page.
I thought that was for
is
us.
separate, right?
oh, it's this.
This one, yeah, it's this one.
I would figure we could take ideas in any format that people want to submit them to us.
Yeah, I would love if even like maybe
Yeah.
it's just this gets put in a doc that we can put suggestions in to get to that finalized form. Is that okay? Because I just don't think this is a very community friendly form.
I think,
I was just
but I
trying
think
to
what
move
she's, I
quickly,
think what
but-
she's saying is that I think what she's saying, there are multiple ways the community can engage. If a group has already worked together, researched the entire summer and has an amendment, just submit the amendment and we can research it ourselves. If it's an idea for us to consider, they can email us directly, individually as a commission, so multiple, they can show up here, public comment. There are lots of different ways to get connected, but if you already have an amendment drafted, submit it to us. Done the work?
I'll entertain a motion.
Well, it's my impression that this form doesn't hurt, but it may not actually address all the issues that we would wish it would, but it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and approve it.
Yeah, I think that having this and then in tandem, we're also pulling and I guess in parallel, I should say, we're also finding other ways to collect feedback. But this is at least a starting point and shows a good faith effort that we are seeking feedback.
Yes, it does. I agree, and I just hope in the spirit of how we're moving forward in the process, there's opportunity to incorporate suggestions on how.
But
But I'm for the proposal of Counselor.
so I just want to be clear, so we have public comment, we have working group meetings, which are public, people can comment in working group meetings.
Correct.
We have public email addresses for each of us. There's a public email for the entire commission. There's a way to submit amendments directly to us. There's lots of different ways for public to have input, and we're gonna schedule public hearings on top of that. So we have
Correct.
6 different ways at least.
At least.
Okay.
And in addition, I forgot about the listserv, the newsletter that goes out to people. I believe that's every other week or so. It's pretty regular that there's information. So yes, and I think this will add another layer to that for seeking feedback.
Yeah, and sorry to be a squeaky wheel on it. I'm just doing an and, not a but to what you said. Like, yes, there are these 6 ways for really effective communication or really effective community engagement. It's not just about like scattershot of a lot of different ways. It's about like how you message an openness to it, how you think intentionally about setting it up. So it's just an and. It's not a but to what you're saying.
Yes.
Agreed.
So shall we entertain a motion on this form then?
Yes.
I so move.
Second.
It's been moved and probably second that we adopt the proposed form for the amendment for the charter of the city of St. Louis. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it, so moved. Now, before we wrap up here, I want to entertain a motion to excuse Commissioners Nolan Eccles, Tagliata, and Sheridan for necessary absence.
I so move.
A second.
What happens if we don't?
Like,
We
we're
follow
not
through.
here, so we're gonna.
Just have for the record that they were here and that we're excusing their absence. All in favor signify by saying aye. And just want to make sure everything, sorry, it's a
No,
rule
it's okay,
stickler.
you're a parliamentarian, you're doing your.
But I do.
I abstain.
Maybe I would
Really?
abstain too.
We're abstaining on that?
I would also
Okay,
abstain.
so, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I so
So
move.
moved.
Second.
I'm guessing everybody wants to go home, so all in favor signify by saying aye.